Hello and welcome to How to Properly Backup Kubernetes Applications. Today's webinar is sponsored by Portworx by Pure Storage and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to the questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know in the unlikely event that you experience any technical issues. A browser refresh is going to fix most audio, video, or slide advancement problems, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide some further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There are two PDFs I'd especially like to call your attention to. One on the Kubernetes data protection platform and another on operating, migrating, and securing Kubernetes apps anywhere with a few clicks. Those are both from Portworx, both great resources. Download those at any point during the presentation, and you can share them with your friends and colleagues. A couple of other things I'll point out in that handout section. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide book club where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has a calendar of upcoming events. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Again, just scroll to the bottom. You'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we do have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Janet Wee, who's Product Marketing Manager at Portworx, and we have Tim Darnell, who's Senior Technical Marketer at Portworx. And now I'm going to turn things over to Janet.
And thanks for joining us today for our webinar, How to Properly Backup Kubernetes Applications, brought to you by Portworx by Pure Storage. My name is Janet Wee. I'm a Product Marketing Manager here at Portworx by Pure Storage, and I am joined today by Tim Darnell, Senior Technical Marketer, also from Portworx. So let's talk about our agenda and what we're going to talk more about today. I'm going to kick things off with the major challenges with Kubernetes data protection. Then I'm going to go into the Portworx backup solution. After that, I'm going to hand it off to Tim, who is going to get into a demo of Portworx backup. And then we're going to wrap it up with resources and live Q&A. So it's really become clear that containerized applications are quickly becoming the new norm. After surveying over 3,000 IT professionals, over 90% of organizations said that they are using Kubernetes in production or they're planning to. However, a lot of these organizations are concerned that their data protection solution won't meet future business challenges and that they won't be able to protect their cloud-native apps. So there's a really clear market need for a cloud-native data protection solution that can meet all of the challenges that come with protecting Kubernetes applications. So let's talk about why it's so hard to find that right data protection solution, right? So what are the several key challenges that organizations face with Kubernetes data protection? The first of these challenges is that traditional backup simply was not built for containers. So cloud-native architecture actually makes data protection really challenging. Containerized apps are built to be very flexible, dynamic, and scalable, and they're built of more than just data as parts. They have application configurations and objects that need to be fully protected if you want to be able to back up and restore quickly. However, traditional backups, which are machine-focused, just aren't built to handle that infrastructure. Traditional backup solutions back up the entire virtual machine, and that approach does not work with containerized apps. I'm going to get into a little bit more of the why of that in just a bit. To fully protect your Kubernetes data, you need a solution that not only backs up at the container level, but also fully understands Kubernetes infrastructure. Traditional backup tools don't have that Kubernetes namespace awareness, and they can't integrate with the Kubernetes API, leaving no real other alternative than to take manual backups of every machine. As I'm sure you can imagine, this is going to cost your teams a lot of time and can leave backups at risk for data loss and human error. And beyond just costing more manual effort, these traditional backup tools can't fully back up an application. Like I mentioned earlier, you need to back up data, application configurations, and objects if you want to be able to fully and quickly restore. Another big trend that we're seeing is that data protection is moving from just an IT responsibility to much more of a shared responsibility among multiple teams, and that includes application owners. So where traditional backup is centralized, container-aware backup provides application owners with a lot of these self-service capabilities, including the ability to set up their own backup policies and rules. This is actually huge. It prevents a lot of IT dependencies and siloed responsibility and gives app owners more power over backup policy. So here we see a little bit more of a breakdown between traditional versus Kubernetes storage. Traditional applications run on virtual machines, and they have simpler needs than a distributed containerized application. So virtual machines are more straightforward to back up. Here you can see that an app is tied to a single server, and then backing up that server with snapshots is sufficient to fully protect the application. On the other hand, containerized applications are totally different. Containerized applications are purpose-built to be highly dynamic, and these traditional methods can't support these modern architectures. So containerized applications are distributed by nature, and that means backing up at the virtual machine level is likely to capture partial data from multiple applications, while at the same time failing to back up complete data from any single application. This makes targeted backup and restore very difficult and time-consuming with traditional backup. It leaves your data at risk for loss. And on top of all of that, backing up at the machine level could lump together applications that require different data protection policies. So it's hard to have that granular level control over your backup. If you want to be able to support fast recovery time objectives, backups must encompass the entire Kubernetes application. They need to work at the container level rather than the machine level and be able to back up entire applications across VMs. So here we see a little bit of that visual of being able to restore across VMs with Kubernetes. And backup is really essential for enterprise applications. The reasons for these are many, but you always have to think about fast recovery in order to avoid downtime, poor customer experience, and risking SLA penalties. However, if you're relying on traditional backups for your Kubernetes applications, your apps and your businesses are exposed. Since you can't back up specific applications and you have to back up at the machine level, this is a slow, expensive process to restore. Again, as I mentioned, you could be dealing with data loss unless you know exactly how to rebuild your Kubernetes applications from scratch, which I'm sure nobody here wants to do. And here we have a quote from GigaOM, who is one of the leading analysts in the Kubernetes space, that talks about why container granular backup is so important. If you don't have container granular backup, it leads to a lot of downstream impact, most of these which I'm sure you don't want to see. So let's go back to some of the other key challenges with Kubernetes data protection. One of the big ones we see with a lot of our customers is that compliance is always a major challenge, regardless of the size of the organization. Every organization needs to adhere to regulatory compliance like GDPR, CCPA, or HIPAA. They also need to adhere to organizational compliance or security governance, especially when we think about things like ransomware attacks or service outages. Organizations need to be able to protect against those. Managing all of this on your own can be really challenging if you don't have a solution that is purpose-built for it. So the next challenge is really that anyone can have a server, disk, or node fail. But if that failure triggers a service outage, that can be the major problem. We've seen with companies even as huge as Meta, where they had a service outage for about 4 or 5 hours at the end of last year. A lot of news outlets were estimating that just those 4 or 5 hours of service outage cost them tens of millions of dollars in potential lost revenue. So a comprehensive data protection strategy should have failover and disaster recovery support. So what this looks like is a secondary or standby location that can take over if the primary location fails. The timeline and degree of data replication is determined by RPO or recovery point objective and RTO or recovery time objective requirements. So to avoid potential fallout or catastrophic consequences of a service outage, all organizations need to have a disaster recovery plan in place. So the last piece that I want to get into is that cloud-native applications are highly distributed, often across multiple clouds and multiple regions. So it's become increasingly clear that single deployment environment or single providers are no longer sufficient to cater to all business needs. Organizations need the flexibility to choose between public or private cloud or even on-prem servers, and also have the ability to move large volumes of data among diverse environments. So to put that into simple words, organizations need the flexibility to back up in one environment and restore in another. And this is where Portworx Backup comes into play, where you can back up and restore your Kubernetes apps anywhere. We like to think of Portworx Backup as the easy button for data protection, providing a fast, easy, and secure platform to protect your Kubernetes apps. And when we think about why Portworx Backup, there are 4 major pillars that we like to talk about. The first is self-service backup for app users in just a few clicks. So you can get started faster than ever on a fully managed data protection service with no install required and easy cluster onboarding with auto discovery. One of the things I really like to talk about here is this self-service management aspect that really empowers app owners to centrally manage all backup and restore on their own so that you can run your apps in production with confidence. By giving that ownership to app owners, it makes it easier to back up and protect data just the way they need, and you're giving the ability to set backup and restore policies to those who know best. And like I mentioned earlier, this also relieves a lot of IT dependencies and management silos as well. The second pillar is this ability to recover and migrate apps anywhere in minutes. So like I mentioned earlier, within a Kubernetes application, you have your data, configurations, and objects that you all need to back up. And we are an app-aware solution, so that means we understand all of those aspects of a application and we back them up. We are also container granular, so that means that you can target specific containers to back up. We were purpose-built to protect Kubernetes applications. And what that means for you is that you're able to quickly back up and restore. Restores often as fast as a single click, which I would be hard-pressed to find something faster than that. And we also back up at the app level instead of the machine level. So that gives you greater efficiencies. You don't have to back up all of these components separately in multiple machines. This speeds up your time to restore as well. With the migration piece, you can migrate applications between clusters, clouds, and regions in minutes. Again, you have that flexibility and that speed, and you can choose between any public, private cloud, or on-prem environment. So again, you have more flexibility in choosing how and where to back up and restore. The third pillar is that you can sleep sound with safe and secure data. So we guarantee protection against ransomware with S3 object lock and immutability. I'll get into that in more detail in just a bit. And you can gain peace of mind with sophisticated role-based access controls and 321 compliance. So the final pillar is one that I think is especially important. A lot of cloud-native data protection solutions claim they do disaster recovery. However, what they're actually doing is that they're saying that simple backup and restore is true and complete disaster recovery. This is not true, and I will have Tim walk through a more detailed explanation of why. But Portworx does offer true disaster recovery. We're able to protect your cloud-native workloads against failures or outages with zero RPO and low RTO disaster recovery for all of your mission-critical data. And one of the things that I also want to announce that we're very excited about is Portworx Backup as a Service. This is one of the first backup as a service products to hit the cloud-native market. And we are very excited because there are some features that we think make it really special. The first is the cloud-hosted SaaS control plane. You get all of the backup functionality that I just mentioned, except you can access it as a service to really easily onboard Kubernetes clusters in any cloud. You don't have to deploy software, monitor, do upgrade management or software administration. We've really made the consumption of this product as easy as possible. You even don't have to install it, so there's no install required. The second piece is auto discovery, so you don't have to upload a separate kube config. What you can do is auto discover clusters by region, by user, and just add it into our backup product in just a few clicks. So you can quickly start protecting your Amazon EKS clusters. We do intend on adding other cluster support later, but we are starting with AWS. We're also excited to announce multi-tenancy with our on-prem product PX Backup. That is a single deployment with configurable roles, but now we have introduced an org structure where you can host multiple PX BAS instances running within the singular org. This caters to a lot of different use cases, workloads, clusters, or instances, and you can centrally manage all of your instances in a single plane. And as I mentioned earlier, even though we do have special integrations with AWS EKS, we can connect to clusters in any cloud, so you can protect your Kubernetes clusters regardless of where they're located. The final piece is enhanced RBAC support. So with multi-tenancy, we've introduced new roles into the org structure. So you have roles that can control from the highest level, and then others that can control within the instance level. And all of this makes BAS much easier to scale. So like I mentioned, with the multi-tenancy and enhanced RBAC, we have the org level now. And at the org level, you can add and manage users, create and manage services. You have a lot more options for controls. Then at the instance level, you have your different types of admins and app users who have the ability to add and manage RBAC users, set schedules and rules, backup and restore, and all of that is within these multi-tenant instances. If we take a little bit of a deeper look into RBAC, beyond just offering some of that security piece, it also gives a full self-service experience for all of the different users in your organization. So the developer has the permissions to backup and restore their apps. The app owner can set schedules. The admin, of course, has the most power in adding different users, creating custom roles. And this empowers app owners with the access that they need to protect their apps. It also helps you keep up with organizational and security compliance and protects against bad actors. And that's going to kind of lead us into our security story, where we have three major goals here, which is to prevent malicious access, secure control so you can track everything that's going on in your backup instances, and recover instantly from any possible negative event. So we've already talked about RBAC, but we also have an audit trail so you can easily see historic activity within your instances to track and alert malicious access. Like I mentioned, we are an app-aware product, so we offer fast recovery, like I mentioned, in that single click. And then you also have the flexibility to restore between any of the environments, also like I mentioned earlier. Then with air gap testing, we offer air gap locations that enable offsite copies to restore in the event of an accidental deletion, malicious attack, or outage in the primary location. And we also support S3 object lock and snapshot immutability with our ransomware story. And let's dive a little bit more into that right now. So ransomware is a huge, huge problem, and it's only growing. We've seen that nearly 80% of organizations have reported being the target of a ransomware attack in the past year. And according to Sophos, the average bill of recovering from a ransomware attack actually totals out to $1.85 million. If that sounds like a really big number to you, that's because it is, but it includes downtime, people hours, device and network costs, any lost opportunities, and ransom paid. So as you can see, there are a lot of hidden costs to a successful ransomware attack, and you want to be able to bolster your data against it so that you never are the victim of a successful one. And that is where Portworx Backup's ransomware protection comes into play, and it guarantees data protection from ransomware. Again, we're flexible. That flexibility piece is back here, where we support all Kubernetes clusters regardless of where they're located. We also offer configurable protection periods all the way down to the hour. And we've also made this really as easy as possible. As soon as you enter a backup location that's object locked, the UI modules will offer configuration options because they'll be able to auto detect that. And then you can choose your protection period, again, flexible down to the hour. And what that does for you is that it really gives you that immutability and delete protection from periods that you get to define. It allows you to easily recover from accidental deletions or malicious attacks if they are successful. So I want to take a little bit of a step back and go back to the beginning of my presentation. I talked a lot about how traditional backup isn't a good fit, so let's dive into a little bit more of why. Portworx Backup does actually offer single-click backup and restore that fully understands Kubernetes configurations, objects, and data. It makes backup and recovery fast and complete and as easy as a single click. This app-aware and container granular backup means you don't have to spend unnecessary time and effort retrofitting a machine-based solution that simply wasn't built for the volume or infrastructure of Kubernetes data. And it allows you to easily back up any application at the pod, tag, or namespace level and speeds up time to restore with complete app backups. And what this diagram is really showing, again, is the cross-cloud mobility that Portworx Backup offers. As you can see, you can back up in an on-prem environment with these distributed apps and then target those specific apps to restore in specific cloud locations. So here we see the orange app restored in AWS and the purple app restored in Azure. This type of data mobility enables enterprises to increase agility, meet compliance requirements, deliver better service, and really keep costs under control. So now I am going to pass it off to Tim, who is going to get into a demo of Portworx Backup. Tim, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Janet. My name is Tim Darnell, and today we're going to be showing you our PX Backup as a service. Now, in the past, you've had to install PX Backup on your local Kubernetes cluster that you wanted to back up your applications, volumes, and Kubernetes components with. We now have a cloud-based SaaS offering, and all you have to do is basically onboard your Kubernetes clusters, and you'll be able to perform the same type of backups that you've been able to perform in the past with the on-premise version. So we're going to start out by going to central.portworx.com, which is where you would usually go to generate your spec for PX Backup. And you can see now that we have two options for PX Backup. There's an on-prem, which is what you're probably used to for installing PX Backup within your Kubernetes cluster. But there's also now a SaaS option here. So we're going to select that SaaS option. And there's two options here once you choose SaaS. So you can use a sandbox trial, which is a free 30-day trial. You can have 2 backup instances. This is basically for you to try out the product and get familiar with it and see if it's going to work for you. Once you have gone through the sandbox trial, you can go ahead and upgrade to our PX Backup as a Service Enterprise license without having to modify what you've done in the trial. So let's go ahead and select a sandbox trial here, and I'm going to name our new service here my backup trial. We'll go ahead and agree to the license agreement, and we're going to go ahead and wait for a few minutes here while our brand new instance is provisioned in the cloud. Okay, so you can see that our new instance is active here, so we're just going to click on it. And it's going to automatically sign us in using SSO. And this is all going to look very familiar if you've used PX Backup before. Our SaaS-based instance is based on PX Backup 2.2, so you can expect all of the features that you would have in a standard PX Backup 2.2 on-premise instance. Now, one of the really cool things about our backup as a service offering is our ability to auto-detect any AWS EKS clusters that you might be using. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, I've already provisioned a couple of EKS clusters for us to use in the US East region, and I've also provisioned a couple of S3 buckets for us to use as targets. Now, one of those S3 buckets will be a standard S3 bucket for daily backups, normal backups of our Kubernetes applications, volumes, and objects. The other S3 bucket has object lock enabled because in PX Backup 2.2, we support object lock buckets, and so we can go ahead and protect against ransomware by having one of those write once, read many buckets available to us. So let's go ahead and click on this Add Cluster button, and you can see that we can support clusters from Amazon, Google, Azure, IBM, and we can even onboard just standard vanilla Kubernetes clusters as long as that Kubernetes API is available from our PX Backup SaaS instance. So let's go through and auto-detect our Amazon EKS clusters. We're going to add a new cloud account. Let's give this a name. And I'm just going to provide it my access key and secret key for my AWS account that's associated with all that infrastructure that I've provisioned. Okay, the last thing is to tell it what region that we're going to be working with, which is US East 1 in this case, and I'm just going to click on this Discover Cluster button. So it's going to go out to Amazon using my credentials, and here are the two clusters that I've provisioned for our demo today. And all we have to do is select those two and click this Add Clusters button. And so it's going to go out, it's going to talk to AWS, and it's going to connect into those clusters, and we can see that it's detected the Kubernetes version that we're running, and it shows our two clusters already active here. So that's how easy it is to onboard any AWS EKS resources into Backup as a Service so that we can go ahead and protect all of our Kubernetes applications and volumes and resources. So now that we have our clusters onboarded, the next thing is to actually tell Backup as a Service what S3 targets do we want to use. So we're going to come into Settings and hit Cloud Settings here. And you can see that it's already saved my credentials for my AWS Cloud account here. So we're just going to click the Add button on Backup Locations. And we're going to create our standard S3 bucket for our backups first. We'll just name this Backups. And we're going to tell it to use that cloud account that I entered during EKS Cluster Auto Discovery. And the bucket that I created for our normal backups is called PX Backups. And again, that's in the US East 1 region. And we'll click Add. So there's one of our targets. Now we need to add that write once, read many target for our ransomware protection. And again, we're going to use that same cloud account, give it the bucket name in AWS that I've configured, And again, it's in the same region. So you can see that that object lock enabled S3 bucket is identified by this little lock icon over on the right hand side. So we now have both of our clusters onboarded, and we have one S3 bucket for normal backups configured as a target, and then we have our write once read many S3 bucket configured for all of our ransomware protection backups. So let's come back over to our cluster list. And I've installed a small application that has a web front end and a Postgres back end where we can create these little Kubernetes icons on the front end, and it's entering a database record for each one of those guys, okay? So let's go ahead and back up that application. Now, I've only installed that web app in this first cluster here. And so I've left this secondary cluster empty to show you how easy it is to restore a full application, including all the volumes and components that go along with that. So let's click on our first cluster here. And the application that I installed resides within this web app namespace in Kubernetes. So we're going to highlight that. And you can see that it says all resources here. Now, if I click this and say select resources, you can come through and you can selectively choose which components within that namespace for that application that you want to back up. And again, this is one of the really powerful things about PX Backup is we're not just doing a volume backup. We are backing up the entire application, the config maps, all of the PVCs and volumes, all of the services, everything that's associated with that, so that when we restore it, it's really a hands-off restore, and the application automatically comes up and is available. So we have our web app namespace selected. We're going to click the backup button here. We'll give it a name. And we'll choose our backup location. So we'll choose our normal backup location here and click create. So that's how simple it is to create a backup for your full application. While that's running, we're going to go back and create another backup into our write once read many bucket for ransomware protection. We'll name this PX Backup Web App Ransomware. And this time we're going to select that object lock bucket, and you can see again that little lock icon that indicates that the S3 bucket does have object lock enabled. So we'll go ahead and create that. And we can see that our normal web app backup has been created here. 42.56 megs worth of data. It's got 1 volume and 7 total resources, which again includes those config maps, all of the services, Postgres, the front end web app, everything associated with that application. Okay, so let's wait for this ransomware backup to complete. Okay, we can see that our ransomware backup is completed now. Now, if you are hit by ransomware, there's the possibility that not only has your application been affected and hacked, but there's also the possibility that your cluster's been compromised, and the S3 bucket that you use for your normal backups could also be compromised. So we're going to show using this ransomware backup to restore our application into a fresh cluster that does not have anything affected into it. So we just come over here, we select restore from that ransomware backup. We're going to give it a name. And I'm going to choose that secondary cluster that didn't have anything installed on it. So no web app namespace, none of the resources that that application was using to run. So you can see here, it's going to ask us, do you want to restore all of the resources from this backup? We're just going to leave all of those selected. We're going to select that replace existing resources, even though there's nothing there, shouldn't matter. And we're going to click that restore button. So we can see our restore happening here. And if we come over, see if it's created our namespace yet. There it is. There's our web app namespace with an age of 33 seconds. So we'll wait for that restore to finish. Okay, we can see that our restore has finished now. So let's pop back over to that cluster real quick. Take a look at that web app namespace. And we can see here is our front-end application pod. There's our Postgres pod, our services, the deployments and replica sets that we use to deploy those. So let's go ahead and grab this new DNS name for our application. And this is the old cached version, so if this was compromised, you'd have a ransomware screen here. So we'll go ahead and close this window. And there we go. Our application's back up. It's usable again. And we've just restored our full application, our persistent data, and all of our Kubernetes objects into a brand new, fresh EKS cluster from PX Backup as a Service. That's it for this demo. Please feel free to head over to PX Central and give the free trial a shot of our PX Backup as a Service and start protecting your Kubernetes applications and data today. So the last thing I want to cover with everybody today is around something that Janet mentioned earlier, in terms of a lot of Kubernetes data protection vendors, claiming disaster recovery, when in reality, a lot of what they're doing are just simple snapshots or clones or simple backup and restores of your Kubernetes persistent volume data. Now, PXDR, which is a product in the Portworx enterprise family, really gives you that synchronous and asynchronous replication capability to where you have true disaster recovery capabilities for your Kubernetes applications and data. So we're going to just take a quick look here at how our asynchronous and synchronous DR works within PXDR and the Portworx enterprise platform. So there's really two options with PXDR to support disaster recovery for your Kubernetes clusters, applications, and data. Let's cover asynchronous DR first. And this is really going to be useful when you have separate Portworx clusters at each site. Your Kubernetes clusters may be in a different region or a different data center, and the network latency between the nodes within those clusters is higher than 10 milliseconds. I like to kind of relate this type of cluster to a VMware Site Recovery Manager configuration in the virtualization world. So let's take a look at the asynchronous DR configuration and setup here. What you're seeing on the screen is going to be something that we've done for Amazon EKS clusters, but again, similar to PX Backup and Backup as a Service, Portworx Enterprise allows you to protect your data with disaster recovery on any cluster, any cloud, anywhere. So let's take a quick look at this. In this example, we'll have one cluster in US East 1 region in EKS, and that'll have Portworx Enterprise on it. The second cluster will locate in US West 2, again within Amazon EKS, and that will also have a separate Portworx Enterprise cluster on it for the underlying storage. Now, if we deploy our applications and our data within that US East 1 cluster, which is our primary, we can then set up a cluster pair object using asynchronous DR to go ahead and copy all of the deployments, pods, services, underlying PVCs and PVs over to that secondary cluster within US West 2. Now we use something called a schedule policy within Portworx Enterprise and PXDR to schedule replication of all of those objects and the underlying data to that secondary cluster in US West 2. And once we need to turn on the actual application within that secondary cluster, we just go in and tell PXDR that I need to go ahead and enable the secondary cluster within my disaster recovery setup, and it will go ahead and make that instance active. Now, with asynchronous DR, you have up to 15 minutes of a recovery point objective, and it really only takes about 45 to 60 seconds in terms of the recovery time objective for your disaster recovery. So let's cover our synchronous disaster recovery option for PXDR. Now, you're going to use this when all of your Kubernetes clusters might be in the same metro network or the same cloud region, and you need availability between different zones, or you have a on-premises configuration where your data centers are maybe 50 miles apart or in that metro region. The real requirement here for SyncDR to work is that the network latency between those nodes at the disparate locations needs to be less than 10 milliseconds of network latency. So you can see here that we've got a similar configuration in EKS that we're showing you as we had with AsyncDR, but that underlying Portworx Enterprise storage layer that you see there at the bottom is actually stretched between your clusters. And this is an important thing to note, because what we're doing when you actually write an I/O to the Portworx storage layer is we're waiting for both sites to acknowledge that write before we completely flush that I/O down to disk. And so again, it's more like a metro storage cluster in the virtualization realm as opposed to just a scheduled asynchronous copy of the data. Everything is in sync at the storage layer with the synchronous DR aspect of PXDR. So this truly allows you to build a zero recovery point objective solution for your Kubernetes applications and underlying persistent data. And again, that recovery time objective still sits around that 45 to 60 seconds because you do need to come in, and once you want to cut over to that secondary cluster, you do need to tell PXDR that you want to enable the secondary cluster, and it will go ahead and bring those pods up using that replicated underlying storage from the Portworx Enterprise cluster. All right, that's all I had to show everybody today in terms of our PX backup as a service and some information around our PXDR offering within Portworx Enterprise. So I will send it back over to you, Janet.
Thanks for that great demo, Tim. Now we're going to get into some resources that you can access to learn more about Portworx and Portworx Backup. So you can get started with a safe, easy, and secure way to protect your Kubernetes applications today We have a lot of information at portworx.com. You can toggle specifically to Portworx Backup if you want to learn more about our backup solution. You can get started with a free 30-day trial on central.portworx.com, and you can keep in touch with us on LinkedIn and Twitter. And now let's move into live Q&A.
Janet and Tim, that was a great presentation, great demo. So let's start here with a question from Edward. And Janet, I'll direct this one to you to start. Edward's wondering, what should you protect in Kubernetes?
Yeah, this was a question that was asked pretty early on, so I think we might have answered it throughout the presentation, but I just want to reiterate again that Kubernetes is more than just the data itself. And if you're only backing up the data, then you're actually missing a lot of key pieces that create the application, like the configurations and the objects. And without protecting all of that, you're actually risking potential data loss, or you're creating a lot of manual work for yourself that's going to slow down your time to restore. Tim, do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think you covered that well, Janet. I mean, again, the capability for PX Backup to grab all of those config maps, secrets, all of those associated Kubernetes objects that are configured for your running application really saves you a lot of time in terms of having to go through and manually re-import your secrets and configure all of your configurations for that application to actually run like other solutions. So,
okay, excellent. And Tim, I've got a question for you. You showed the traditional version of Portworx and then the new backup as a service. Are they designed for different environments, like a data center deployment versus deployment in AWS? Are they interchangeable? Like, how should our audience think about the ideal use case of one versus the other?
So, PX Backup, the standard version, we can really install anywhere. A lot of people have historically used that in their on-premise environments, data centers, as well as cloud instances, right? But with PX Backup as a service, the real benefit there is that you're getting all of the features and functionality that we have in our on-premise or user-installed version, but you don't have to actually continue to maintain your control plane. You don't have to worry about version upgrades. It's really more of a hands-off approach. And since we offer that as a service, whenever we update PX Backup, if you're using backup as a service, you're automatically going to get your instances upgraded and get access to any new features that we might release with point upgrades.
Gotcha. So sort of like in the shared responsibility model, you're not worried about updating your own infrastructure. That's all handled in the service.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay. And thanks to everybody who answered that poll. We'll move ahead, keeping going with the live Q&A here. And one other question on that, when it comes to best practices, do you recommend backing up to different platforms? Like if you're using, AWS, for your Kubernetes, and then do you back up to another platform, or is the best practice to keep it elsewhere, within AWS? What do you guys recommend? What do your customers do?
That's really up to the customer. Of course, we've seen things like AWS region outages, right, which have taken down not only the running applications, but also some of those S3 targets that you might be backing up all of your applications and infrastructure to. So we're really flexible. We support any S3 compliant bucket. So it doesn't matter if you're using a bucket in an Azure cloud or an IBM cloud or an AWS cloud, as long as we can target that S3 bucket, we give you that flexibility to kind of have your data stored wherever you want it, in terms of being able to meet your compliance needs, or, in the case of outages of cloud providers, be able to have copies of that data in disparate clouds where you can restore them again to any cloud anywhere.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we had a comment here from Matthew, thanking you for addressing ransomware. And Tim, I wonder if there's anything else you want to mention about the special case of recovering from ransomware in the Kubernetes world.
Yeah, no, and Matthew, thank you for your questions today. And you did ask, does it matter which cloud we use? And so to kind of piggyback on the answer to the last question, absolutely not. As long as we can target your Kubernetes infrastructure via a kubeconfig and that API is exposed via your cloud provider, it really doesn't matter if you're running in GCP or IBM Cloud or Azure or AWS, or even if you just have a standard vanilla Kubernetes cluster running somewhere in a public cloud. As long as our control plane can access it from backup as a service, we can back up that information or we can restore those applications to any public cloud provider. Great question, Matthew.
Okay, super. And Tim, I'll just say, you've been carrying on a number of sort of great side conversations with people on their specific questions, sort of throughout the session here. Anything interesting in any of those conversations that might be applicable to everybody on the call today?
No, I think I'm just finding it really interesting that folks are not aware that we can actually back up all of these Kubernetes objects as part of their data protection strategy, right? With some of the other vendors out there, again, as Janet and I mentioned earlier, they're really only targeting the persistent data or the actual persistent volumes within Kubernetes. And so this is kind of I guess it doesn't surprise me fully, because this is really it's a surprising reaction from our customers when they say, wow, you can actually take everything associated with my running application inside Kubernetes, and you can back all of that up, and it's a single click restore to another Kubernetes cluster, and all of my applications up and running. I don't need to go to my DevOps team and have them generate new YAML and do all of these kubectl apply commands and generate new secrets. We can literally just fully restore that application. So I just think that's a really important, concept to drive home to everybody today, that we're not just backing up that volume data. We're truly giving you a full application restoration experience for your Kubernetes applications.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for reinforcing that, Tim. Great point. Tim, another question that's come in is actually from Tim, who's asking, what are the best ways to respond and mitigate Kubernetes incidents, such as threats or misconfiguration through Portworx?
So, I think we covered some of the threat things using our ransomware protection and object lock capabilities, right? One thing that I've actually talked to several customers about in terms of misconfigurations is, since we're actually able to back up all of those config maps and configurations that are stored as Kubernetes objects inside your Kubernetes cluster, a lot of our customers are going through, and as soon as the Kubernetes application is up and running and configured properly, they have all of their correct secrets and everything's running great, they'll run that backup, and they'll back up all of those Kubernetes objects associated with the app. And as you saw when I went through and restored the application in the demo, if you only want to restore a specific set of configuration data, then you can just go through and select that secret or that config map or whatever that Kubernetes object is that is good. And so if you do have a developer or someone that goes into the Kubernetes cluster, misconfigures a piece or a portion of the application, you can easily come into PX Backup, choose that restore, and then only restore that specific Kubernetes object that was misconfigured, and the application is back up and running, and you've just recovered from that misconfiguration.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, it looks like we are running out of time. There have been a lot of questions in here. Tim and Janet, we will get all these questions to you, so you guys can get back to people individually. But Janet, if somebody wants to get started with Portworx or find out more, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I highly recommend checking out our website. If you want to check a free trial out, kind of what Tim showed you today, and try backing up a couple sample applications and clusters, I recommend getting started on central.portworx.com. You're going to see a sign up page, and that'll lead you into your free trial. So if you're curious and want to test out the product, I would highly recommend doing that.
Okay, excellent. Well, Janet and Tim, thank you for putting together a great presentation today. Really cool demo, just really cool technology. I've learned a lot today. I think based on the questions and comments everybody here has, and thanks for the insights in the Q&A as well. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
And with that, it's now time to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to Diana Barry from Connecticut. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that gift card. And of course, thank you to Portworx by Pure Storage for supporting today's event. Visit portworx.com for more information. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.